Okay, everybody, this is chapter 14, using visual aids. You're going to need to use visual aids for the upcoming speech. I'm about to open the assignment criteria for that so that you can look it over and start preparing for your topic outlines. Make sure you read the assignment criteria carefully because it tells you that you need a minimum of 3 visual aids. A good rule of thumb, it's not a rule, but a good rule of thumb, meaning a good way to think of it, and have it sort of be the default unless you have a reason for there to be a different approach. A good rule of thumb is to have 1 visual aid per main point. So if you've got 3 main points and you have a visual aid to support each main point, you're good to go. Now remember, it's a minimum of 3 visual aids. You can have more than that. And title slides that just say your topic on them, or source citation slides that have your works cited page on them, will not count as visual aids. You can do those, a lot of people do, but they don't take any sort of integration into the speech. They don't take a lot of creativity. So those are absolutely permitted if you want to use them. They just don't count toward that minimum of 3, because the purpose of a visual aid is to support and clarify your main points, to clarify your speech topic and everything that that entails. Okay, so let's get into it. So what are the advantages of visual aids? Well, I just said a few of them. So clarity, meaning that it makes things clear. It gains interest because most people are primarily visual learners versus just auditory learners who learn primarily by hearing. So most of us learn all, unless we have some sort of issue that precludes us from being able to use one of these ways of learning. We learn primarily through 3 different ways. We learn visually, kinesthetically, and orally, AUR, or through our auditory abilities, which means visually we learn by seeing, kinesthetically we learn by doing, hands-on learning, and then auditorily or orally, AUR, we learn by hearing. So we learn by seeing, doing, and hearing. And most people are primarily visual learners. They retain, which is the next thing, retention, which is they're remembering, they're retaining, they're keeping the information that they're getting. Most people do that primarily through visual stimulation. And so because public speaking is primarily a spoken medium, we need to do things to activate that visual part of their brain so that they can learn in the way that works best for them. It also helps build credibility, because if you're using a visual aid, then it automatically gives that idea that you have prepared this and that you have thought about it and that you're ready, that you've been thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about your presentation. And that credibility makes you more persuasive, because if we can trust that you're prepared, it's not a huge leap to trust that you know what you're talking about. Okay. So there are different kinds of visual aids. This is on your exam, so I'm going to give you a second to look at this list. Okay, there are objects and models, which would be a physical item. So for this speech, if you were to be doing a speech about, let's say medical debt, and you showed a paper bill to the camera, that would be an object, right? You would obviously want to block out any identifying information, but that would count as an object or a model. So visual aids aren't just digital. A photo and drawing, same thing. You could hold that photo or drawing up to the camera, or you could share your screen like I'm doing now. The only difference is if you go back to the first 2 videos I made, the syllabus and then chapter 1, and you can see how I'm still seen in the corner of the screen, that would be how you would want to do it if you did it via Zoom. And then we have graphs. Everybody loves a good graph because it helps synthesize information that is otherwise kind of hard to process, like numbers and statistics and figures. Charts do the same thing. A chart is a really good way to look and see the impact of a percentage in a way that makes the percentage itself make more sense. Videos are very helpful as long as you can cue them up so we're not waiting for an ad to play or for it to buffer or for you to fast forward. There's a way to embed videos into your PowerPoint that you can look up and implement. I have a lot of students do that. You yourself might be a visual aid. If you're doing a speech on, that wouldn't be a good topic for this upcoming speech, but if you were to do a speech on how to give CPR or how to render first aid, how to do the Heimlich maneuver, how to do a yoga pose, how to do a dance move, then you could demonstrate that yourself and you would become a visual aid. And then obviously we've got PowerPoints, and that's what I'm using now. And so hear me say this, for this upcoming speech, you can have a mix. You can have, if you have 3 PowerPoint slides, as long as they're not the title slide and or a resource slide, a source citations slide, your works cited page, for example. Sorry, my cat is crying. If you can hear him, sorry. A PowerPoint slide counts as a visual aid as long as it's not a title slide or a works cited page. 3 different slides count as a PowerPoint, but 3 different images on the same slide or 3 different PowerPoint slides count as 3 separate visual aids. But if I put 3 different pictures on one single slide, that would only count as 1 visual aid. So 3 separate slides, as long as not the title slide or the works cited page, and those would make up your visual aid requirement, 3 separate slides. Or you can do a bunch of pictures on one slide, but it only counts as 1 visual aid. And I wouldn't put a bunch of pictures on there unless you have a really good reason to. We'll talk about that in a minute, because the more images that are on there, the more time you're going to need to show it so we can see everything without being frustrated. And then it's going to kind of drag your speech down. Videos cannot total more than 1 minute of your speech presentation time. They are factored into that 4 to 6 minute time limit. So if you do 3 videos, they can count as your visual aids, but they cannot total more than 1 minute. So you might have 15 seconds for the first one, 30 seconds for the middle one, and 15 seconds for the last one. That would be okay. But any longer than that, and you're going to get a big deduction. So those are the different types of visual aids. So again, videos cannot total more than 1 minute. If this is a question on your exam, and it doesn't really matter for a virtual setting like we've got, but the principle can still apply. The reason that we want to enlarge our photos or our drawings is so the audience can see them clearly without you passing them around. Because if we pass them around in a physical classroom, people are distracted. They're visual learners. They're going to look at where the movement is. They're going to be waiting for their turn to get it. They're going to be watching everybody else whose turn it is. And they're not going to be listening to you. So instead of supporting your speech, it's dominating your speech and taking the focus. So you don't want to pass visual aids around. You want to enlarge them for your audience and display it on an overhead with a PowerPoint, ideally, because that's a nice, clean way to show them. This is an example of a visual aid, a photo or a drawing that might be effective if you're trying to get an audience to understand what having dyslexia is like, for example. This is what a person with dyslexia might see when reading this sentence. So it's a simulation so that people who don't have dyslexia can have a glimpse into what the experience is like for someone who does. You can see how that makes things more clear for someone who is having a hard time understanding the concept of dyslexia, and now you've given them an experiential view of it. Here's a line graph. If you've got a bunch of years and percentages and you're trying to show how something has changed over the years, like through inflation or the economy, those are common ones. A line graph is a good tool to do that. And there are tools online that allow you, if you look them up, to make your own line graph if you can't find one that shows what you are trying to illustrate. Now, here's the thing about these graphs, though, y'all. They are sources. So if the information on this graph is not correct, or even if it is correct, I want to be able to follow the breadcrumbs back to the source, which means that you can double dip, or you can have more than the 3 required sources, because that's in your assignment criteria too. We're going to talk about that in chapter 8. You're going to need to cite a minimum of 3 sources with specific requirements. And a line graph or a pie chart or anything that has statistics and figures on it is going to need to be cited. So you can double dip. If you cite the visual aid fully with the requirements set forth in Chapter 8, it can count as a visual aid and as a source citation, as long as you're saying the source citation with your mouth, because it's an oral citation. And again, we're going to cover that in Chapter 8. Here's a pie graph that shows the differences in the percentage of married versus single women and other demographics from 1900 until 2010. So you can see what you are trying to illustrate there, that many more married women are in the workforce in 2010 than were in the workforce in 1900. A bar graph I've mentioned, those are nice, clean ways to look at how things are different from a demographic to a demographic, or how things have changed over time, or from a region to a region. And so this is an example of an effective bar graph showing the different statistics relevant to households in different racial demographics. So median household incomes between Black people who identify as Black and people who identify as white, so those demographics. And then infant mortality per 1,000 births, the unemployment rate, and college degrees. Now, this is an older graph, probably from 2010. That information is not super current now, but, well, it may not be, I'd have to look. Is not obviously current, but it effectively illustrates the way that you would present that information in a bar graph. You can make your own chart as well. And if you get the statistics and you make your own chart, you still have to cite the statistics if you make your own chart or your own graph, because those statistics came from somewhere and we need to know how to trust them, why we can trust them. Charts and graphs, all that jazz, it helps listeners visualize the info very clearly. It shows steps in a process potentially, and it keeps things simple and clear. Again, with your videos, keep them short, key to the start of the clip, integrate them smoothly. Now, what does it mean to integrate? It means bake it in. If it's a pizza, the toppings are not all underneath the pizza. They're not all on the top of the pizza. They're worked into the cheese and in the middle of the pizza. They're baked in, right? So you want to integrate your presentation aids and your source citations into your speech. You don't want them all at the beginning or all at the end. You want them woven throughout the body of your speech, ideally. You might decide to have one in the introduction. You might decide to have one in the conclusion. But you definitely would need to have some in the body to support the development of your main points, because that's the bulk of the speech and its purpose. So integrate them smoothly and read the textbook chapter 14 that we're on now for more clarification about that. And avoid low resolution. We want to be able to see it. So for your purposes, hear me say this. Mechanically, how are you going to show your visual aids? Well, you can show let's say that you're recording your speech on a laptop. You can show your phone if it has the image pulled up or the graph or whatever it is. You can show your phone to the camera. Just give it time to focus and make sure that the audience can see it and that it's in frame. Or you can do it the other way. If you're recording on your phone, you can show a laptop, or you can hold up a printed out piece of paper. Okay, the rule of thumb for this, for our online speeches, is if I can see it, it counts. If I can see it and you have integrated it and it helps your speech in the ways that we've discussed, it counts. So just find a way for me to see it. Because the other way, besides showing another device or showing a printed up piece of paper or showing an object to the camera, would be sharing your screen via Zoom and recording your speech that way. So those are the different ways you can do it. We talked about how you could use your body to demonstrate something. Just make sure you practice that, because sometimes people will have things that are such second nature to them. They're like, oh, I do this yoga pose all the time, it'll be easy. And they don't practice it. And then there's a little bit of wonkiness because you tried to wing it and then you got nervous or you didn't know how to start or whatever. So just make sure you practice it. We know what a PowerPoint is because we're using one right now. It combines several audio and visual materials, because you can, again, bake a video or an audio clip into a PowerPoint. You'd have to look up how to do that in a way that works for your device and your comfort level. Use PowerPoint strategically and use them to enhance specific points. Don't just put an image up there because it relates to your topic in a way that you understand. You have to contextualize it. That's part of that integration. You're making clear what this has to do with your speech and why it's necessary. Don't use so many that they overpower the presentation, and don't read from the screen because that makes the visual aids and or the speaker pointless, right? They're redundant. So you can look at the screen, you might read a quick blurb from the screen, but that's not all you're doing, and you're not monotone, and you're not reading you don't have your preparation outline printed up on your PowerPoint, for example. And in a physical classroom, you don't turn around away from the listeners to read the screen behind you. I have students do that sometimes. Prepare them well in advance and keep them simple. Make them large enough for us to see and limit the amount of text. You see how I've just got 4 bullet points there? That's a good amount of text. Anything more than that or longer sentences than that, what are you going to do instead of listening to me? You're going to read. And if I'm going to read instead of speaking in a way that seems natural, then I might as well just hand it out a paper copy of my speech, giving you my preparation outline. Why am I necessary? Use fonts effectively. Don't use fonts that are distracting or difficult to read. And same thing with color. We don't want things that don't have enough contrast. We want high contrast. You see how I've got white up against a dark blue, and I've got black up against white. I don't have yellow against white because the contrast is too low and you won't be able to hear it, or sorry, see it. Use images strategically. Think about what you're doing and what you hope to accomplish with whatever you're showing us. And if you don't know what the goal is, you probably weren't thoughtful enough. So again, you don't want to have too much text. You want to limit it so that we know exactly what's important. This is a great slide. I've got high contrast. I've got an easy to read font. I've got 2 clear bullet points. I've got a picture that shows me. And so my brain is going to snapshot that and retain it a lot better than it would if we didn't follow those guidelines. So clear, easy to read fonts with normal case. We don't want them super tiny so we can't read them. We don't want them super big so they're taking up a lot of the slide. No more. Here's the thing that I want to emphasize, because sometimes people like to get crazy with the fonts. We don't want more than 2 different fonts per slide, because the human brain is wired to recognize and look for patterns and significance to those patterns. So if you give me more than 1 or more than 2 fonts on a slide, my brain is going to be trying to figure out what the different fonts mean and why you use them. It's almost like listening to a Taylor Swift album or watching a music video and looking for those Easter eggs that she's famous for. Our brain is going to be looking for, well, why did you use that font there? And why did you use this font here? And what are we doing while we're doing that? Well, we're not listening to you. Okay. That pattern recognition sensibility is going to keep us from listening to you. So standardize your fonts across the slides. You don't want different fonts on every slide for the same reason. We're going to be like, ooh, there's significance there. And it might just be because you thought it was cool. So be thoughtful about things. And make sure your titles are properly sized, as are your text choices for your body. So for example, the heading of this, Mystery of Easter Island, is a little bit bigger than the rest of it. So you know that that's the overarching heading, so that you understand what umbrella that information fits underneath. Just like limited text, that this is all an example for, is the largest text on that whole slide, because that's the heading for, this is sort of meta, but that's the heading for the slide that shows another heading and shows the bullet points in the picture. So you're sending a message with those choices. Here are some ineffective fonts on the left side of your screen, and those are fine stylistically for different things, but they're not easy to read. They're just a little bit more difficult. Our brains are wired to pick up fonts that look more like typewriter fonts from back in the day. So those are some effective ones, because that's how we learn to write our letters. So those are more effective, more clear ones that we can see at a glance. We don't have to work to read them. So the more effective ones are on the right. So again, that high contrast, easy to see, limited number of colors, and consistent across the slides. We don't want things to be too busy or too varied, because our brain will look for patterns. Make them large enough, make them high resolution, clear and simple, and include a title on the slide so that you know what you're showing us and why. So if you're doing a speech about Martin Luther King Jr., for example, which you might have done if we'd done the second speech, But if you were to do a speech on Martin Luther King Jr., you might have a picture of him, and then you would have his name at the top. So we know at a glance who that is and why it matters. Display where the listeners can see. So for your purposes, that could mean sharing your screen, showing it to the camera, whatever you need to do. Avoid passing, just so you know that for your exam. Display only while discussing. So if I am talking about something later and I've got the visual aid up for a full minute or even a shorter time, my audience is wondering the whole time, what does that have to do with what they're saying? And again, they're looking for that connection. They're looking for patterns and connection. And so if it doesn't have anything to do with what you're saying, they're going to be confused. So make sure that you wait to show it and that you stop showing it when you're not discussing it. And so if you're sharing your screen, if you're using a PowerPoint, you might want to put blank slides in between to make that easier, and explain clearly and concisely, what are we looking at and how does it help us? Talk to the audience, not to the visual aid. We talked about that. That's especially important physically in an in-person classroom so that you don't turn your back on the audience. Practice with your visual aids. Check your devices, your room, your equipment, whatever you're using, because it's your responsibility to make sure those things are working, okay? And that is all for chapter 14. I'll go ahead and post this on YouTube, and then I'll post the next chapters.